Hello and thanks for joining in. Today we're going to talk about what you need to do to get your RX-8 reliably on track. The emphasis of this video is going to be on reliability, and some of the tips and tricks that I'm going to share would apply to equally to any track build, while some of them are RX-8 platform specific. At this point, they're 15, 20 years old, so it's really more important to focus on reliability and basically getting the car back to factory spec than it is at throwing go fast parts at it. Another reason for that is the RX-8 is fun, even stock, so put your money definitely towards maintenance and restoration. I like to start with fluids. Don't underestimate the importance of quality fresh fluids. For the brakes, I like to use Valvoline DOT4 synthetic from the local auto parts stores. It's inexpensive, and I've never had fluid boil or fluid fade running that in an RX-8. For the differential, I run Mobil 1 75W90 with or without the limited slip additive. I don't know that that's ever made a difference for me. For the transmission, I do run Redline MT90. It is a little crunchy in very cold conditions, below freezing conditions for the first couple of miles. However, I've tried the Ford Motorcraft oil, I've tried Redline MTL, and I've tried to get away with thinner fluids because conceivably you might have a little bit more power transferred to the ground with a thinner fluid, but they have thinned out too much at events, and I've got grind once that fluid got up to temperature. So the MT90, it's on the thicker side, but once it warms up, I've never had grinding, and I feel like it provides the best protection, especially for lapping where you're getting a lot of heat build up in that transmission. I use pretty much any engine oil as long as it's a 40 weight in the summer. I might run 030 or 530 just in the winter because I'm just trying to get oil flow and get up to oil temperature when it's cold out. But in the summer, I definitely run a 40 weight, anything from 040 to 1540, whatever's on sale. And I do run usually synthetic. Now, by synthetic, I mean Group 3 dyno-based oils. Don't use PAOs or ester-based or Group 4 or Group 5 oils. That's what Mazda is worried about when they say don't use synthetics. It's the Group 4 and 5s. Group 3s like Mobil 1 or the Super Tech that I pick up for cheap at Walmart, they're full synthetic. All of those I think work fine in the RX-8. I don't use SON. I've always just used the factory OMP oil injection, although I do pre-mix half an ounce when I'm at the track per gallon of gasoline, and I have used Versatuner to slightly increase the oil injection rates pretty much across the board to just, under routine driving, increase the lubrication of the rotor housings. Cooling upgrades, that's the next big topic, and that's where you should spend a lot of your time and focus. The factory fresh RX-8 cooling system is a bit marginal at best. I have a list of mandatory upgrades and things to address that I'll share here, and then we'll circle back to some optional cooling upgrades here in a minute. But starting off, you need to have a good condition radiator, a good condition AC condenser, good condition oil coolers, and your plastic expansion tank where the radiator cap is located needs to be in good condition. If you've got bent fins on any of those, especially the oil coolers get beat to hell, you need to try to straighten out those fins, and there's ways to do that. Zip ties, needle nose pliers. But if you're blocking airflow through those heat exchangers, you're going to be having a huge hit to your cooling efficiency. The plastic expansion tank from the factory gets brittle with age, and in rare cases it could explode, and that would end your track day, and you wouldn't want to risk melting down an engine. So I would highly recommend replacing that expansion tank preemptively. Second is to seal the OEM radiator on 3 sides with high density foam. I use high density upholstery foam in combination with some high temperature rated adhesive, and I cut that to shape. The purpose of that is to make sure air is going through your radiator and not around the radiator, because it's airflow through the radiator core that actually does the cooling for you. So we've got pictures here that we're able to share of what that looks like. I keep the radiator open on the passenger side because that's where the exhaust manifold is, and I have found, and others have found, that it's good to let some air bypass the radiator, flow past the hot side of the engine, and it actually helps to flush out hot air out of the engine bay. There was a time when I sealed all 4 sides. The coolant temperatures were great, but the underhood temperatures were quite high. And so I found it to be effective to allow some air to bypass to help flush out the hot air out of the engine bay. Next up, after that, I do run a higher pressure radiator cap. You'll notice that the 0.9 bar cap that the RX-8 is provided with allows the system to burp even when you start to get the coolant remotely hot. And so going to a 1.1 bar radiator cap from Gates, $5 part, increases the pressure of that just a little bit, such that you'll be a little bit less likely to boil over and lose coolant once things start to get hot. Along those lines, another popular trick with the RX-8s is to extend the overflow tube that leads out of your expansion tank and send that to at least underneath the under tray. The real point there is to make sure that that coolant isn't being sprayed all over your radiator fan connectors, because that's a known place where you can get corrosion if your coolant is puking out all over those electrical connectors. The next big thing is to seal the OEM under tray. First off, make sure you have an OEM under tray. The car is absolutely going to overheat if you do not have a good condition under tray installed. And then beyond that, there's a number of holes within the under tray, which I assume are to keep it from bowing and deflecting too much under high air loads. But I seal those up with some speed tape, and then I use a zip tie. Some people have used an angle piece of angle stock to help reinforce the under tray, but I usually just take a zip tie in the center and go up to the AC condenser screen to hold that under tray in contact with the foam in the radiator. Make sure that doesn't sag in again and allow high pressure air to just bypass the underside of the radiator. You want to keep that tray high and tight to make sure that that is sealed well to the underside of the radiator. Cheap and easy upgrade is to go away from 50-50 coolant water mixtures and go to a 75% water, 25% cooler mixture. The reason for that is that water has more specific heat capacity and cools your engine better than glycol does. I run about 25% just to keep things lubricated and to make sure that if it did get really, really cold, I wouldn't have any freezing issues. But 75-25 should work very, very well in many climates. Mazda offers a heater hose restrictor orifice, a small brass fitting that goes in one of the heater hoses at the front side of the engine. What that does is it reduces the amount of hot coolant that bypasses the engine through the heater core and just gets recirculated. And it forces a little bit more coolant to instead take the pathway through the radiator, again, to make sure that that portion of the coolant is actually cooled by the radiator. Lastly, I recommend enlarging the exits of the oil cooler vents. I don't recommend leaving those pieces out entirely, because you will get, on sticky tires, at least stones and debris thrown up on the backside of your oil coolers, and that will bend them. And again, that's detrimental to cooling if you've got bent fins on the oil coolers. But enlarging those oil cooler vent exits inside the fender wells will allow more air to flow through those oil coolers and escape. So there we have it for engine cooling upgrades, the baseline, the bare minimums. The next most important thing for track is brakes. If you have a brake failure, it is going to be a bad day. Fortunately, the RX-8 is blessed with some of the best factory brakes that I know of for a car with this amount of weight and power. They're very, very large and effective. They've got a lot of swept area and big pads, but it is important to have good condition rotors, good condition calipers. The pistons need to be able to move freely, and you need to use high temperature rubber compatible grease on the guide pins, especially the front lower guide pins. They've got a little rubber bushing. If you use a grease that is not compatible with rubber and it causes that to swell, you will get binding and the caliper will not slide, and you will again have a bad day because the caliper is not going to slide and or retract properly, and you'll get brake drag. Beyond that, depending on your tires, depending on your experience and your pace on track, that will lead to what sort of brake pads and friction material you need. If you're on not so grippy tires and you're just starting off, you could probably get away with Hawk HP Plus. Those are fairly inexpensive and have a reasonable heat threshold. But if you're an advanced driver and you're on sticky rubber, you will bake those and or fade those and wear them quite quickly. So I would recommend, if you're at the upper end of the pace spectrum, I found that the DTC 60 from Hawk, fairly inexpensive and lasts a long time and has as much friction as you pretty much should ever need. So that takes care of brakes. Common theme there, just making sure the factory hardware is in good condition, choosing a pad compound that matches your tires and driving pace. Ignition, even for a street-driven RX-8, ignition is critical to a healthy engine. The Rev C OEM coils and the revised ignition wires I have found work extremely well. I use OEM plugs for street and autocross, but if I'm going to do track driving or any extended high-load driving, I have used quarter range plugs in those situations, because if you run the factory plug, you can run them so hot that the electrode will just melt off, or you can get deformation and distortion of the rotor housings because of how much heat concentration there is on those plugs. So yes, for extreme conditions, you will want to run quarter plugs, and as long as you drive the car hard enough, you shouldn't get excessive fouling doing that. Other basic tune-up stuff, making sure you've got a good quality clean engine air filter in there. Clean the mass airflow sensor while you're at it with the right type of spray cleaner. Make sure your cat is not clogged. So again, an RX-8 with poor ignition system can burn out the factory cat pretty quickly, but if it's clogged, that's also leading to a lot of engine stress and a lot of heating, and that will end your track day fairly quickly. So if you're restricted to a factory cat, make sure it's in good condition. If the rules and local laws allow it, you could run a high flow cat or a mid pipe and eliminate that as a potential expensive failure point. Definitely inspect all of the suspension links, the ball joints, the boots, making sure they're in good conditions, the suspension bushings, but especially the front control arms. The bushings there are under a lot of stress. The ball joints at one point maybe had a recall involved with them, so certainly check your front lower control arms and make sure that they are in good condition. That's it, folks. That's the basics of how to get an RX-8 on track, and really a lot of it is just bringing it back to factory spec. Some of it is making some intelligent cooling upgrades while you're at it, but that's really all you need to make sure you've got a reliable platform under you that you can churn laps at the track and have a good time without spending a bunch of money. With that said, there is some optional stuff that will enhance your track experience. The first of those is a basic performance alignment. Mazda essentially gave the RX-8 maybe slightly positive or zero camber up front and quite a bit of camber in the rear from the factory. That might be safe on the street, but that is not fun on track, and it's not great for tire wear, especially at the front. You're going to wear the outside edges of the tires because the tire is going to roll over positive and you're going to be grinding the outside shoulder of your tire. So a good performance alignment, the car is going to handle better, you're going to get better tire wear, and you're going to have a better track experience overall. With that said, the front eccentric bolts, especially the bolts that are offset to allow for the suspension adjustments, caster and camber, those are almost always seized on an RX-8 unless you've been extremely lucky to get one from a location that doesn't use road salt, doesn't see a lot of rain. So it is a huge headache to go in there and deal with those eccentrics being seized. But ultimately, especially if you're a true enthusiast and you want to get on track and you want to be competitive, you're going to need front camber up front, so that'll be something you'll have to deal with. The factory engine mounts are known to sag, and that'll put your driveline out of alignment. It is a good idea, I think, preemptively to even replace the engine mounts. The fuel pump can go weak. I had fuel pumps fail on both of my RX-8s. The Series 1 pump is fine. The Series 2 pump is a slight upgrade, but both work acceptably for track as long as you're willing to keep enough fuel level in there to prevent starvation as the fuel level goes lower. Stainless steel braided front brake hoses aren't a bad idea on any car that's being tracked. The RX-8 is known to have a weak clutch pedal assembly. The spot welds there can actually tear, and so your clutch pedal assembly can actually break. So it can be good to preemptively put in a few extra spot welds to reinforce that clutch pedal assembly. There might be these days some aftermarket options for that, although I did it myself with a welder. Additional cooling upgrades. I mentioned we would circle back to the topic of cooling. On my car, I run the RX-8 Performance water pump and alternator pulleys. The water pump pulley helps to reduce the likelihood of cavitation at extended high RPM, and the alternator pulley helps to burn out the alternator from overspinning at high RPM at the track. The Flexolite 420 fans are a nice cooling upgrade that almost bolt onto the factory radiator assembly. It's a good match. Those are more important, I would say, for autocross or drifting or other low speed, high load events, when you don't have a lot of air coming through the nose of the car and you're trying to force it through with fans. That is extremely important. On track, maybe not so much, but the factory fans, they got a little bit weak on this blue car here, and I was running pretty concerning engine coolant temperatures at the autocross, and it was struggling to cool down between runs. So the FAL 420 fans are a nice upgrade for just keeping the engine cool while you're beating on it on course, but then also a quick recovery time between runs. I mentioned Versatuner earlier. Versatuner is nice for doing things beyond just increasing engine horsepower by tweaking air-fuel mixtures. You can increase the OMP injection rate. You can lower the fan temperature activation points of the fans on the car. And that also helps to keep the car from overheating in grid or in the paddock between runs. I did on my car relocate the battery up next to the firewall. That really wasn't as much for weight reduction or for corner balancing as it was to just open up the backside of the radiator. So for all of the fantastic engineering that Mazda did on the RX-8, they did put a lot of crap packed in right basically at the backside of the radiator. And if you think about the function of the radiator again, you want air to be forced in through the front and to be able to escape freely out of the backside. So the more crap you have restricting the airflow exit behind the radiator, the less total airflow it would seem you'll get through that heat exchanger. So by removing and relocating that battery to another location, that opens up a sizable portion of the radiator's exit such that flow through the radiator, which is key, is enhanced. I don't have one. I like the factory airbox, but I have run in the past cold air intakes, and the AEM especially, or the Mazda Speed, they're basically functionally the same thing. Those intakes in combination with a modified airbox tray can allow you to significantly open up, again, the space behind the radiator to allow more air to be able to escape and flow through the radiator. And then lastly, I like to know engine health information. So oil pressure, oil temperature, water coolant. Those are my big three. I've got a gauge pillar in the center console that is up high and kind of towards the line of sight that lets me keep an eye on all of those parameters. For a track day, I want to make sure the oil is up to temperature but not overheating, and I don't want to see coolant temperatures say past 215 and certainly not 220. So I feel like it's a small investment to make sure that your engine is in good health and that you don't overheat and destroy an engine. So there you have it, folks.
I'm ready, I'm ready, I'm ready, I'm ready, I'm ready, I'm ready.
Again, the theme here is reliability. A lot of the stuff I discussed today is basic maintenance, which RX-8s do need at this point, again, being a 15 to 20-year-old platform. But please use this video to help you get your RX-8 ready for track. But again, don't rush out and try to throw a bunch of go-fast parts on it. Please go out there, enjoy it the way it is. Just make sure it's running reliable. And then once you've got a nice, reliable base, from there, you can add the suspension parts, you can add power adders and stuff like that. But I'm hoping that helps people. If you've got any questions or comments, I'm sure a lot of this I talked about quite quickly. Feel free to leave questions and comments in the video description below. And I look forward to seeing you guys in the next video.